The rain poured down like buckets. Drops slowly flowed down the legs and arms cuffed in iron handcuffs. When did everything go wrong? The guards led the girl to a wooden bowl burning on the altar. She and the rest of those gathered considered her trash. They believed that His Majesty was a wise monarch. Looking at the bull engulfed in flames, the girl wondered if she had really committed such a grave sin. Such was the punishment. The people shouting towards the girl and the imperturbable emperor thought so. Standing under the cold drops of rain, feeling the shackles on her limbs, the girl realized that the only thing worse than death could be waiting for her. Sitting on the cold floor, chained to the wall, Guinevere thought that her feelings for Lancelot had sunk into oblivion because their relationship was established in the past. Lancelot came to her, knelt down in front of her, taking her face in his hands. It seemed to Guinevere that this miracle had been granted to her. It seemed to the girl that this would happen. She listened to the words of the guy who promised her that this time he would not allow this to happen. The time spent searching for the girl seemed like too long a journey for him. Therefore, Lancelot was not going to lose her again. He asked her not to even try to run away from him. Unfortunately for Guinevere, she develops a strong attachment to Lancelot, whom she met by chance in her second life. Typically, this relationship is called love and hate. The guy grabbed Guinevere in his arms, pressing him closer to him. He promised her that he would still find her by any means necessary. Guinevere thought it must have been a long time before winter came to you who left in the spring. The bright sun flooded the entire space with its light. The girl was holding an armful of bright, beautiful wildflowers in her hands. The girl was walking briskly towards the temple when she noticed the boy. He also walked with flowers in his hands. The girl noticed that one of the flowers had fallen out. Having overcome her embarrassment, she turned to the guy with a trembling voice. The guy looked upset. He said that one should not bring a flower that has fallen to the ground to the altar, but he no longer has time to find a new one. Without hesitation, the girl said that he could take her flower. The boy became embarrassed. He couldn't afford that. But the girl calmed him down. She asked him not to worry because today she didn't have to bring flowers. Still red as a tomato, the guy accepted the offered flower. The girl decided that she needed to quickly deliver the bouquet, and then she could go and rest. The guy felt a breeze run through his legs as the girl walked past him. Almost stuttering, the guy turned to the already departed girl. She stopped, turning back to the boy. She assumed he needed another flower, but that was not the case. The boy introduced himself as Lancelot and asked what the girl's name was. Not expecting such a question, the girl fell into a stupor for a short time. It took her a few seconds to come to her senses and comprehend the question. Finally, the girl, smiling broadly, replied that her name was Guinevere. Watching the back of the retreating girl who was slowly walking towards the temple, Lancelot repeated her name as if trying to get used to it. Guinevere. Time passed, they grew up, but they all also met in the temple, where Lancelot ran up to the girl with a joyful cry. Guinevere! Years have passed. They have already grown up, becoming adult lord and lady. Having met in the backyard of their usual temple, Lancelot asked the girl to promise him something. The guy promised that no matter what, he would return alive. Therefore, he asked Guinevere to wait for him. The girl was confused. He didn't say anything. It was so unlike the guy. Lancelot tried to justify himself, but the girl stopped him. She assured the guy that it was okay if she found it difficult to answer. Guinevere will still wait for him and keep her promise. Lancelot did not know when this day would come, but he promised that then he would definitely tell her everything he ever wanted to say. Covered with a blush, Lancelot asked the girl not to forget him until he returned. Shining with a radiant, affectionate smile, the girl gave him this promise. However, time moved inexorably forward. First a year passed, then two, but Lancelot still did not return. Lancelot, who suddenly disappeared in childhood, did not appear even when Guinevere came of age. A long, tedious wait is enough for the promise once made to fade away. The girl stood under the altar in a beautiful snow-white dress, holding the hands of her chosen one. Some were surprised how this young lady, without any connections, married a nobleman. There were rumors that the girl was from a convent, and the Duke had a little daughter, so people assumed that Guinevere was needed as a nanny. A luxurious estate, a huge mansion with large stained-glass windows, colorful flower beds, and tall spears. There they called her Mrs. Bright. Although her husband did not love Guinevere, he was very caring, and her daughter loved her with all her heart, although she was not her natural child. But there was a dark side to it all. Laughing maliciously, the guy poured the tea right on Guinevere's head. He ordered her to bring more tea, or she would go deaf. The guy demanded that the girl immediately run after him. Evil, nasty, and vile, they considered Guinevere a parasite that lived in their home. The girl, holding her parents' hands, was delighted. She had never seen such a large ship before. Guinevere thought about her husband. Arthur was impeccable only at work, but at home he was simply there. Guinevere affectionately asked the little girl how much she liked the ship. The girl enthusiastically replied that she was looking forward to it. A storm raged over the endless expanse of water. Powerful waves hit the side of the ship. The maids asked the girl not to do this, asked her to return. The girl sat with her hands outstretched, as if she hoped to reach Arthur and Sally to save them from this raging storm. She asked to save them. They should save them quickly. Guinevere did not pay any attention to the maids, who persistently advised her to return because it was dangerous. A painting with a family portrait fell to the floor with a crash, causing a web of shards to form on the glass. Guinevere believed it was her fault. If she had kept a better eye on Sally, she and Arthur wouldn't have gone underwater. If only they hadn't gone there in the first place, it's all her fault. They stood at the funeral, surrounded by tombstones. It was raining again. The guy grabbed Guinevere painfully by the hand, turning her towards him. He blamed the girl for the death of his brother, because if she had not let go of his hand then, he would not have died. A servant appeared and interrupted their dialogue. The guy asked what happened, but the servant replied that it was the will of Duke Bright and he must deliver it personally to Madame. At that time, the girl had already gone to her husband's grave. Noticing this, the guy said that Guinevere now needs to be alone. He will definitely tell her this when she comes to her senses. Jiro, Arthur's only brother, took out all his resentment on Guinevere after his brother's death, while the girl herself was burning with guilt because she did not grab Arthur's hand when he began to be carried away by the current. That is why the girl could not answer Jiro. In the rays of the bright sun, in a snow-white caftan with gold embroidery, Jiro knelt down on one knee, feeling the weight of the sword on his shoulder. Now he, Jiro Swan Bright, was created Duke. After naming Jiro Duke, Guinevere had to accompany him to the imperial palace. It made her feel like a slave. But despite this, she had to follow Jiro, because only in this way could Guinevere atone for her guilt. The girl's hands pressed on. Scarlet blood flowed down the dagger, clutched in the palm, onto the fingers. Jiro used Guinevere for murders. The girl didn't have much choice. If she didn't listen to Jiro, didn't follow his orders, he locked her up. And without the slightest hesitation or remorse, he beat me. A year has passed. The girl's clothes turned into rags stained with blood. She no longer knew whether it was hers or someone else's. There were iron shackles on his arms and legs. Guinevere could barely raise her head, but the Emperor continued to force her to do so. He called her a sinner. He accused her of killing more than 100 people over the past year. The Emperor did not understand how this fragile girl was capable of such cruel acts. Guinevere sat on the floor, silently staring at the Emperor. A piece of her tongue was cut off and the girl's vocal cords were damaged, so even with all her desire, she would not be able to answer him. Guinevere wanted to admit to the Emperor that this year had become a real hell for her, but she could not squeeze out a word. Suddenly, a familiar voice was heard from behind. Jiro hurried as fast as he could to the girl. Jiro didn't understand how the Emperor could doubt his man. He insisted that Guinevere had been framed. She would never do anything like that. The Emperor did not understand how the Duke could protect such a sinner. Jiro just silently lowered his eyes to the floor, sitting down on one knee, as if only now remembering the norms of decency and etiquette. Jiro recalled that Guinevere was his brother's wife. She was the one who escorted him to this imperial palace full of loneliness. She was someone to whom Jiro was extremely grateful. How could he, Jiro, the man who spent so much time with this girl, not know Guinevere? The Emperor objected to this, that he had a witness. Seeing that same witness, Jiro was shocked. It was Fionuala. He couldn't believe it. How could she? She was Guinevere's servant. The Emperor asked the girl to tell everything she saw in great detail. The maid obeyed meekly. Fionuala told the Emperor that she was Guinevere's maid. She escorted the girl to the imperial palace, for the previous master ordered them to stay near Guinevere. But after entering the palace, the girl began to move away from the maid. At first, the maid thought that Guinevere was simply uncomfortable, because she was a noblewoman who had suddenly sunk to her level, but that was not the point. The maid admitted that a little later Guinevere stabbed Lady Blanche Florence. She will never forget that picture. Lady Enrique, Lady Rodo, Lady Benita, Lady Chloe. All these deaths were at the hands of Guinevere. And most recently, Fionuala's close friend Samantha joined them. All these people were killed by Guinevere. The maid was afraid that if the girl found out that she had seen this, she would kill her first. But now finally she was able to get rid of this fear. The maid begged the emperor to punish this demon. Jero was furious. He didn't understand how Fionnuala could allow herself to lie so blatantly. Jero tried to prove to the emperor that this was not true, that Guinevere was not to blame. Although the maid's story sounds plausible, the emperor asked the duke to maintain his dignity. Not heeding the words and arguments of the duke, the emperor ordered Guinevere Le Tuire to be taken away. Guinevere was sentenced. The murders she committed were brutal and merciless. She had too many victims, and for this she should be burned at the stake. Seeing the guards leading a weakened Guinevere to her certain death, Jero looked worried, and yet he could not contain the contented chuckle that escaped from under the mask of emotions. The rain poured down like buckets, but Jero, despite this, rushed after the guards who were leading the girl. One of them stopped the guy. He explained that Guinevere was a dangerous criminal who could escape. Jero said that he did not have time to say goodbye to her and assured that it would not take much time. In the end, the guard allowed them to talk for just a minute. He took the girl's face in his hands, turning her towards him. Wiping away a sad tear, Jero broke into a predatory smile, admitting to Guinevere that it was he who ratted her out. Jero loved her. He had wanted her for a very long time. He saw the anger in her eyes. She blames him. How can that be? Jero didn't understand how she could be so stupid that she allowed him to treat her like that. Jero wished he could see Guinevere die holding a grudge against him. But when he looked at her like this, helpless, broken, on the verge of death, he believed that it was beautiful in its own way. Thanks to Guinevere, he got rid of everything unnecessary, and at the same time managed to maintain his position. Jero admitted that, by the way, at first he really blamed the girl for the death of his brother. Jero wanted to ruin everything. He wanted the girl to understand what this feeling was like. He wanted to be the last thing she saw before she died, so he whispered to her to die quickly. Jero let go of the girl, pulled on his mask of regret and sadness again, brushing away the tears that came out, and told the guards that he was finished. Guinevere was shocked. Fear for her life, anger and rage at Jero. All this mixed up inside her. The girl tried to scream, but there was no voice. The fire of rage raged inside her. Guinevere looked at Jero's smiling face as she was pulled into the burning bull, closing the bolt. The guy did not betray himself until the very end. He was still the same even when death came for her, but she didn't blame him. Guinevere couldn't hold a grudge against him. If he really loved her, if he knew how to appreciate love at all. Bloody Jero. She hated him. Lancelot ran out into the square, trying to break through the crowd of people who had gathered to watch the execution. He called Guinevere, hoping that she would still hear him. But as soon as he broke through the crowd, tongues of flame were reflected in his eyes, which enveloped the trap in which his Guinevere was. The last thing Guinevere thought about before her death was that she never met Lancelot again. Guinevere came to her senses while sitting in the cemetery. She heard Jero's scream breaking through the sound of raindrops on the marble floors. He heartrendingly asked his brother to open his eyes. The girl did not understand what was happening. Did she think it was a dream, or perhaps she went to hell? Guinevere heard Jero address her. He again blamed her for Arthur's death. If she hadn't told him to go to sea, he wouldn't be dead now. Jero believed that his brother died because Guinevere came to their house. It was all because of her. The girl did not understand what was happening. She must be dead already. She looked around, realizing that she was now at Arthur's funeral. She was suddenly struck by a hunch. Had she really returned to the past? The girl burst into devilish laughter, unable to contain her emotions. This is simply terrible. She shouldn't have returned to that day. But her consciousness persistently told her that she must continue her life. Jero didn't understand why the girl was laughing. He called her crazy, but Guinevere hardly listened to him. All she thought about was that his life with him was just a nightmare. Jero walked towards the girl. He won't let her ignore him. Having calmed down, Guinevere clearly decided for herself that this time she would not allow herself to simply remain silent. Jero swung at the girl with a flourish, wanting her to respond like that for ignoring him, but Guinevere caught his hand in mid-flight, fearlessly meeting the guy's gaze. Jero, who did not expect a rebuff, was taken aback by the girl's actions. Guinevere pushed his hand away, ordering the guy to get out of her sight now. Jiro was shocked. He didn't understand why this non-entity suddenly allowed himself to do this. He asked if the girl really didn't understand anything. He thought Guinevere was simply crazy. Guinevere did not react in any way to Jiro's words. Gesturing to the maids, the girl replied that it seemed to be hard for them now, so she asked them to take Jiro and the mistress out of the cemetery. Jiro tried to break free, ordering him to be released immediately, but two maids, grabbing him by the arms, managed to take the guy away. Now Guinevere could breathe a sigh of relief. Guinevere was forced to admit that she had gone back 5 years. She believed that she should not repeat the actions of the past because it led to her imprisonment. Guinevere found it hard to believe that she had another chance for salvation, but most importantly, she didn't understand why. The girl decided that in any case, she did not intend to treat them the same way they treated her. It will be difficult for Guinevere to drive them out of the palace. To do this, Guinevere needs to prepare something. First of all, she needs people who will be on her side. Guinevere decided that attending the receptions of noble families would be a good decision. She intended to stop grieving for the departed and go out into public more. She needed to unwind. After all, even if others are not against her, Jiro will definitely fix it. Guinevere decided that first of all she needed to start with the maids who live in the bright palace. The girl picked up a pomegranate seed, squeezing it in her fingers and splashing scarlet juice around. She understood that some of the maids might be in cahoots with Jiro, but she didn't care. Jiro used people for his own benefit. Guinevere experienced this herself. To deal with people, you need to show them your heart. Guinevere decided to start with the servants of this mansion. Joan, a pretty young girl, was one of the most experienced maids after Thomas. Before arriving to work at the palace, Joan was just a dim star with no self-confidence. Guinevere's husband found out about this and decided to help the girl. The maid Joan saw Arthur as a benefactor. Guinevere was just thinking about how to approach this child when she heard an indistinct cry from the next room. It turned out to be an angry Jaro who was shouting at the maid. He didn't like that she dared to serve him tea in this particular mug and forced her to remake the tea immediately. The girl, with tears in her eyes, knelt over the broken cup, trying to remove the fragments. While collecting one of the fragments, the maid accidentally injured herself. Blood immediately came out of the cut. Running up to the girl, Guinevere took her wounded hand, wanting to help. Guinevere asked the girl if she was in much pain. Looks like Jiro wasn't in a good mood today. The girl explained that the emptiness that formed inside after Arthur's death is limitless. Guinevere asked the maid not to overwork herself. She, still trying to hold back her tears, bowed politely, thanking the lady. The maid immediately ran to share the news with other maids. She told them that Guinevere seemed to be having a very hard time, as was Jiro. Another maid admitted that it was the first time she had seen the mistress in such a state. The maid shared that the mistress took care of her hand, and added that such good gentlemen with fire will not be found. Guinevere strode along the corridor, never ceasing to think about her plan. She believed that what had been achieved was still not enough, because they were not some stupid children. She didn't feel anything at all. She needed something more. In addition, Guinevere decided that she would need to somehow get rid of the estate. She believed that this was the most urgent task now. Guinevere needed to figure it all out quickly. Jiro and his wife were terribly annoying. The girl kept thinking about where she should send them. The man tried to get in by loudly knocking on the door. Finally, a servant appeared in the aisle and politely inquired who had come to see them. The man replied that Duke Bright was dead, and he was his notary, who had come to convey the master's last will. The notary was invited inside, inviting him to sit in the living room on a soft sofa upholstered in a beautiful blue fabric. Guinevere immediately met the man, noticing that a lot of time had passed since their last meeting. The notary expressed his sincere regret about the events that happened. Guinevere thanked the man for coming, but he only modestly replied that no thanks were needed. Guinevere was a little surprised that Arthur left a will. She noted that notaries had never come before. She wondered what caused this change. The notary gave Guinevere the document, noting that it indicated that the Duke of Bright had stated that he was transferring all powers to his wife. The man added that the will was written by the Duke after the wedding ceremony. 3 years have passed since their wedding ceremony. Guinevere found this strange. After carefully examining the document, Guinevere noticed that there was a missing seal at the end. This surprised her a little, because Arthur always put his stamp at the end. The will was intended for his daughter and Guinevere. The girl suddenly remembered how in a past life a woman reassured her. She promised to take care of the inheritance and advised the girl to take care of herself. Soon, he and Jiro began to deal with financial issues. These two deceived her. They all told Guinevere that she was too weak from grief and therefore would not be able to take on her husband's powers. If Guinevere had not returned to the past, she would never have known about it. But now that she knew about it, should she be happy? The girl knew what was going to happen, so she had better stop. Guinevere clarified whether it was correct that, according to the will, Arthur transferred all his powers and titles to her. The man confirmed this. Guinevere noted that the will stated that she could only retain the title until Sally came of age, but Sally has already... The notary reported that the Duke said that if there was something wrong with Sally, she would not take over the powers. The notary added that this was said orally. The will that remains in this world is the only one that Guinevere had. Guinevere clarified whether this meant that he, as a notary, would be on her side. The man agreed. He noticed that the girl devoted herself not only to the late Duke, but also to Miss Sally, for which she deserved encouragement. Guinevere thanked the notary for his words and asked if her husband had said something else during the hour. The man added that the Duke advised the girl to do what she saw fit. Guinevere followed Arthur's affairs and saw his caring side, but until the very end, her husband was cold towards her. Now Guinevere knew how things really were. She thanked the notary for telling her this. The man remembered that it was he who introduced Arthur and Guinevere. He knew everything would be okay, but he never thought it would be this good. It seems that the man only now realized what kind of person Arthur was. Guinevere invited the notary to stay with them for a few days, because Glastonbury was quite far from here. In addition, Guinevere noted that she had to thank the man somehow. She would also like to inform the palace about the will a little later. The man asked if this meant that Guinevere wanted to postpone the official statement. The girl confirmed his words, citing the fact that she needed to put her thoughts in order. Guinevere noted that not only she, but also Jiro and her mistress had problems. However, the girl still has unfinished business. Guinevere decided that she would follow her husband's last wishes. The girl asked the notary if she would have problems with this. Guinevere also asked whether it would be difficult to transfer her husband to a monastery. The notary asked if she meant the cemetery, to which the girl nodded. The notary asked, slightly surprised, whether the lady objected to this. Guinevere replied that she was satisfied with everything. Bowing politely, the man promised that he would take Arthur to the monastery, but Guinevere advised him to rest for now. Calling the servant, the girl asked to take the notary to the room. Sipping her tea leisurely, Guinevere was glad that Jiro and Mrs. McFadden had gone elsewhere. Now all she had to do was get rid of the estate. Noticing the mistress's condition, the maid asked if everything was okay with her. Placing a new cup in front of the girl, she noted that it was hot tea with dried chrysanthemum and honey. The maid noted that this tea was very calming and advised the lady to drink it while it was still warm. Guinevere thanked the maid for her concern, giving her a gentle smile. The maid breathed a sigh of relief. She was worried that the tea she brought would not suit her mistress's taste. The maid was not sure that she had the right to console her mistress, and yet she tried, noting that the Duke had gone to a better place. Guinevere noted that the maid, like her, would have a hard time, but she would definitely adapt. Noticing the girl's condition, Guinevere advised Joan to go and rest. She asked the maid not to worry about her, because she was fine. Instead, she asked Joan to take care of herself. Unable to contain her emotions, Joan allowed tears to form in the corners of her eyes. Noticing this, the girl immediately tried to pull herself together, apologizing to her mistress. She was embarrassed, because Guinevere was clearly having a much harder time now than she was. She apologized again for her behavior. Without answering, Guinevere just silently handed Joan a handkerchief. The maid could not help but notice how much her mistress had done for her. Unable to control her emotions, Joan fell to her knees, clinging to her mistress. Guinevere gently stroked the girl's head, trying to calm her down. Guinevere also wanted to cry now, but she understood that tears had now become an unaffordable luxury for her. The whole point was that pain, sadness, and resentment had become unacceptable to her. It was all evil. Instead of regretting what had already happened, Guinevere should have tried not to lose anything more, even if it means hiding your feelings and deceiving yourself. Guinevere was calmly, even a little bored, sorting through papers when Jiro burst into the office screaming. He again called the girl crazy. Without being distracted from her work, Guinevere noticed that the guy was being too loud. Jiro became even more furious that the girl didn't even raise an eyebrow at his appearance. Not falling for these provocations, Guinevere asked the guy not to raise his voice, adding that she was ashamed of him. However, Guinevere asked what was the matter. As far as she remembered, they were supposed to be back the following week, or was there something causing problems with that? Jiro admitted that he heard something absolutely ridiculous. He asked what right Guinevere had to move his brother's grave. Was it her business? In a rage, Jiro flew up to the girl's desk, abruptly sweeping away all the papers from there. He asked if Guinevere had gone crazy. Jiro continued to scream, calling Guinevere a crazy bastard. He wondered where she hid his brother, where he was now, where she took him. The girl just calmly asked how Jiro knew about this. Guinevere wanted the two not to know that the grave had been moved, but they found out anyway. The girl assumed that they paid someone. Guinevere noted that she was sorry that they had arrived earlier than planned, and the girl also reminded Jiro that he had forgotten something. Now she made decisions in this family. The guy asked who said that. Guinevere replied that she had inherited all her husband's titles and powers. One way or another, his title was transferred to her. Jiro decided that the girl was out of her mind, so all her words were meaningless. He couldn't believe it. Arthur was his brother. Jiro again reminded the girl that she was to blame for the death of his brother. Arthur could have lived at least another 30 years, but he left so early because of Guinevere. If it weren't for her, if she had told him not to go there, he wouldn't have died. Jiro again called Guinevere a piece of trash who killed her husband. The girl tried with all her might to remain calm and not follow the guy's lead. She noted that next time Jiro should knock and wait for her permission before entering. Jiro was shocked by this statement. Guinevere tried to convey to the guy that he was behaving extremely inappropriately. Jiro didn't understand how the girl even dared make comments to him. He wasn't going to leave her alone. Without reacting in any way to Jiro's last phrase, Guinevere called the maid into the office. She immediately appeared from behind the door. Guinevere told the maid that the master said that he did not like the trip, so she wanted to send them to Swansea. The girl asked the maid to take Mrs. McFadden there. There was no trace left of the former rage on Jiro's face. Now he expressed the deepest sadness. Tears welled up in his eyes. He turned to Guinevere, calling her sister and not understanding what she was talking about. Covering his face with his hands, Jiro began to sob, continuing to lament about his deceased brother. He asked Guinevere to tell him where Arthur's grave was. Jiro asked to tell him where she hid it. For this, he even knelt down in front of Guinevere, begging her. The maids were shocked by what they saw. Jiro continued to sob on his knees. He clung to Guinevere's legs, her dress, begging her to tell her where she had moved Arthur's grave. Guinevere took the guy's face in her hands, asking him to immediately rise from his knees. The girl admitted that his words were full of pain for her departed brother. Bending over the guy's face, Guinevere promised him that her husband had a decent grave, so he didn't have to worry. Guinevere abruptly lowered Jiro, turning her back to the guy who continued to kneel. The girl firmly ordered the maids to take him away from here. Jiro tried in every possible way to break free from the grip of the maids holding him. He asked his sister not to do this. Realizing that they were all in this together, Jiro decided that he had only one way out. Guinevere cannot help but pay attention to this. Drawing a small dagger from its sheath, Jiro pointed it at himself, causing the maids to recoil from him. With a steely voice, Guinevere ordered him to stop. Coming close to the guy, Guinevere quietly whispered in his ear so that he would not try to harm himself, because then it would be difficult to clean up after him. Guinevere also added that it would be better for him not to contradict her. Jiro was shocked. The girl wanted him to obey her. Guinevere noted that if Jiro wants to become a duke in the future, then he should not have a dark past. She added that the bright estate would disappear into darkness forever. Jiro was shocked by this statement. He didn't understand what Guinevere meant, but the maids took him away before he could get an answer. Jiro asked her to talk. He only asked for 1 minute to end the conversation, but Guinevere was adamant. She only wished her brother a safe journey. Guinevere turned to the table with papers, saying rather to herself, although turning to Jiro, that when he returned, there would be nothing here. Once outside the office doors, Jiro ordered the maid to let him go immediately, roughly breaking away from the girl's grip. Having come to his senses a little, Jiro put a charming smile on his face, answering that he would go further on his own and the maids did not have to accompany him. Jiro didn't understand how the girl dared to kick him out and what she meant when she said that the bright estate would disappear. The guy thought it was all nonsense. Jiro firmly decided that he was not going to just remain silent. He will make Guinevere regret all this. A servant informed the Marquis of Wheafield that a letter had arrived from the bright estate. Having carefully studied the contents of the letter, the Marquis asked if he understood correctly that Mrs. Bright had set such conditions. The servant confirmed this. The Marquis immediately ordered that everything be prepared. He was going to meet Mrs. Bright. The servant replied that he would immediately prepare a carriage for the master. A few days later, Jiro and his wife returned to the estate. Guinevere, who met them at the entrance, noted that they must be hungry, so they would start with a meal. Following the girl, Jiro noted how arrogant she was, since she had first kicked him out the door, and now she was offering him food. Arriving at the dining room, Guinevere invited everyone to sit down. Jiro decided that this was the girl's way of trying to apologize to him. The guy thought that Guinevere was really helpless. With a joyful smile on her face, Guinevere suggested that they eat quickly before everything gets cold. Jiro realized that this was not a favor he did out of pity. The dinner that Guinevere gave them today looked like it was their last dinner. Having finished the entire dish that was on the plate and almost gnawing off the bones, the woman noted that the dinner was terrible and what was Guinevere thinking about, serving them this. The woman noted that she was tired of fish back in Swansea, and she was not going to eat it again here. She stated that the fish gave her a stomachache. The woman continued to lament that just the sight of the fish made her sick. She noted that if her son were alive, he would have fed her better food. She couldn't believe that she used to like it, and called what she had just eaten some kind of dirty trick. Jiro also began to be indignant about the food, although Guinevere noticed that they had already eaten almost half of it. Out loud, she only calmly noted that the food did not suit both of them. Jiro was glad that Guinevere finally realized this. He shared that he would like to eat lamb now. The woman agreed with this proposal. Guinevere smiled slyly, feigning fear that she did not know what to do. The fact is that now no one on the estate can cook this for them. Jiro didn't understand what Guinevere meant. How is it that there is no one to cook on the estate? The girl noted to herself. That these people in the yard don't even realize that this is their last meal. Guinevere reported that she had dismissed all the cooks who worked on the estate. So even if they don't like the food, they still have to eat it. Guinevere thought that since there was no one to cook something else, then nothing could be changed. The woman asked if Guinevere herself could do this. Jiro supported her. Since there are no cooks left in the estate, Guinevere must prepare new food. Picking it up from the table, Guinevere said that she understood what they were both hinting at. Guinevere approached the woman, taking her plate. She was surprised, not understanding what Guinevere was doing. The girl explained that since they didn't like the food, she should first remove the dirty dishes. Guinevere said she would take it all to the kitchen first. The woman was shocked again. She did not understand what had come over Guinevere and why she was doing this. Guinevere calmly stated that she respected her family's tastes and simply wanted to throw out the trash. Sharply hitting the table with her fist, the woman demanded that Guinevere bring them new food in that case. The woman started screaming. She ordered Guinevere to go and prepare new dishes because she was dying to eat. Guinevere ironically noted that human nature is determined from his very birth. Guinevere remembered how back then, in her past life, these two also forced her to cook. Guinevere then asked why she had to cook, since there were cooks on the estate. Jiro then slyly noted that, of course, you couldn't bring your brother back, but the girl had to be able to cook. The woman then remarked disapprovingly that she did not understand why her son was with such a girl as Guinevere. Putting the dirty dishes aside, Guinevere noted that since they were hungry, then let them go cook for themselves and then eat whatever they want. Jiro was furious. Now they also had to cook their own food. Poking her fingers into the dirty dishes, Guinevere noted that this was the last dinner these two had in this estate. If the two of them are done, then Guinevere urges them to leave this place immediately. Guinevere reported that everything in Bright's possession would soon pass to Whitfield, not only the estate, but also the title and estate. Jiro and the woman were shocked by what they heard. Jiro got angry, hitting the table with all his might. He didn't understand who needed it. The girl laughed cheerfully in response. How's that for anyone? Of course she needed it. Jiro keeps screaming. He claimed that this was his brother's land. This was the place he had fought for. Guinevere had no right to dispose of this land at her own discretion. And the title, too. Calmly fishing a folded piece of paper from her sleeve, Guinevere showed it to Jiro. This was the will Arthur left for her. The girl remembered her husband's words that she should do what she saw fit. Guinevere noted that she knew what kind of people they were and what they were planning to do. Yes, and they know it too. Jiro was in shock through all this. He thought it was ridiculous that they had nothing left. To this, Guinevere only suggested calling the very notary who drew up the will. Jiro began to shout again, declaring that his brother was not that kind of person. The guy said that this will was a fake. Guinevere is tired of Jiro's constant screams. She stated that she no longer wanted to continue this pointless argument and urgently asked the guy to leave the estate now. Grabbing the girl by the shoulder, Jiro declared that he was not going to leave here. Guinevere replied that in this case she would be obliged to force him to do this. Grabbing a bottle of wine standing on the table, the girl calmly threw it onto the floor, causing it to shatter into pieces. Guinevere didn't understand why Jiro couldn't learn to speak calmly. Waving her hand, the girl called the guards to her, asking them to take the guy out of here. Jiro started screaming and struggling again. He asked to be released and to do it immediately. Jiro stated that Guinevere is not even from the imperial family, and therefore she has no right to decide anything in this palace. The guy didn't understand how she achieved all this. Jiro didn't understand how Guinevere even dared treat him like that. Arthur was his brother after all. Before, Jiro's life was beautiful and serene, and all this was only thanks to his brother. Therefore, Jiro did not contribute in any way to the marriage of Arthur and Guinevere. He didn't want the girl to marry his brother, so he disliked her. Guinevere sincerely noted that her husband was everything to her, and now she became his heir, so she once again warned Jiro not to go against her will, because it would bother her. Guinevere turned away from the guy, finally advising him to be quiet and not show off. Jiro continued to scream and break free from the guard's hands. He promised Guinevere that she wouldn't get away with it just like that. Guinevere exhaled with relief, breaking into a serene smile. Hard times now awaited Jiro. Guinevere had just finished packing her things and was still sorting through some papers when there was a knock on the door. The maid said that it was the butler Thomas who had come. Guinevere asked him to come in. Bowing politely, Thomas announced that Guinevere had a guest. The butler also said that Jiro and Miss McFadden went to visit their relatives who lived nearby. Guinevere knew that Jiro had gone to his uncle after all. Uncle Jiro was worse than the two of them combined. He was a greedy and insatiable man. Even if Jiro tries to take advantage of his uncle will in turn take advantage of Jiro. Guinevere noted that since they had gone to such a person, she would not send them a letter. The butler replied that in that case he would take the lady to the reception room. Guinevere thanked him for this. Noticing the girl, the man bowed his head, smiling slightly, and noticed that they had not seen each other for a long time. Guinevere also greeted Mr. Whitfield. It was Jean Barrett Whitfield. This man played an important role in Arthur's life. He was not a man of many words, but he was trustworthy. This was the reason why, of all the nobles, Guinevere chose Mr. Whitfield. She decided to sell the estate to him at a fairly favorable price. Guinevere sent Mr. Whitfield all the necessary documents, so she was a little surprised that he came here in person. The girl asked what was the reason for his visit. The man replied that there was nothing special about his visit. He just wanted to make some amendments. Guinevere was a little surprised by this. Previously, Mr. Whitfield reported that he was satisfied with all the conditions, so Guinevere did not understand what he wanted to change. The man replied that, in general, he would like to change everything, which meant that everything would now be completely in the interests of Mr. Whitfield. The man noted that he had heard about Duke Bright, and that it must be very difficult for Guinevere now, since she decided to let go of this estate. The man carefully studied all the documents, and in general, he is completely satisfied with everything. However, preserving Bright's holdings interested him much more than profit. Guinevere assumed that this meant that the price she offered was too low, and Mr. Whitfield would like to change it. The man initially agreed, but then added that he didn't care about the price at all. Guinevere shared that she would be leaving this place within 4 days, so she would like to complete everything as soon as possible. Mr. Whitfield noted that the girl should take a profitable share for herself. These possessions are worth it. The man advised Guinevere, instead of getting rid of the estate, it was better to leave part of the land. Guinevere asked whether this was consolation or advice, but the man replied that it was neither one nor the other. He shared that he knew what happened to her and that he had once given advice to Duke Bright. Guinevere decided that since this was the case, then they needed to discuss the terms of the deal again. The man agreed with this. Guinevere said that the conditions would be whatever Mr. Whitfield wanted them to be. She will leave this estate, and the man will still have to try to get her to give her consent. Guinevere wanted Mr. Whitfield to promise her something. The man was completely attentive. The girl asked that if after she leaves the estate someone starts looking for her, the master would say that he does not know her. Guinevere also said that she would prepare all the documents confirming her death, so that it would definitely be impossible to contact her. Mr. Whitfield asked if she had to do this. Smiling softly, Guinevere replied that yes, of course, because now she wanted to live for herself. Replying to her smile, Mr. Whitfield said that he understood the girl. Finally, Guinevere asked the man to take care of all the estate workers until the very end. Most of them grew up here, so if they were fired, they would simply have nowhere to go. Mr. Whitfield assured that the girl did not need to worry about it. He will definitely protect them, for which Guinevere sincerely thanked him. 4 days have already passed. Guinevere was supposed to report Arthur's death to the palace, and also report that she was renouncing her title. She needed to prepare a letter. In addition, the Whitfields gave the girl a large amount of money. Guinevere assumed that this money would last her a lifetime. She even decided it might be worth donating half of them to the church. The man was a little taken aback. He assured that he could not accept Guinevere's money. It was too much for him. But the girl persistently asked to accept them. She noted that she was not just giving him money, but asking him to spend it on the mausoleum of her husband and child. The man noted that Guinevere is not obliged to do this. He swears to look after Arthur and Miss Sally anyway. But even so, Guinevere still asked him to accept the money. Glancing dreamily out the window, Guinevere shared that she had something else to do. The man noted that she spoke as if she was going to go somewhere very far away. Without answering, Guinevere only gave the man a meaningful look, and he said that he understood her. The girl decided that in this case, she would leave all this to the man, and wished him to be happy. Guinevere stepped out onto the balcony, taking one last look at her estate. If she was going to leave this place, then it was better for her to leave everything in the past and move on, since her dear daughter would no longer be able to run around on this lawn. Guinevere remembered Arthur's words. Even then he told her that due to the big age difference, he would never be able to love her, so the man asked the girl to simply protect his family, as a wife and as a mother. Arthur wanted them to be together for a long time, and the foundation of their relationship was friendship and trust. But Arthur is no more. And, as he said, Guinevere could leave this place. The only one left who would suffer would be herself. Retiring in a carriage from the estate, Guinevere wished everyone to remain happy, because she would never return here again. The girl felt that she had spent too much time in this estate. How painful it was for her. Guinevere was once the princess of the kingdom of Leongrass. She lived a peaceful life and bathed in love. But then, when she turned 6, war broke out on the continent. Unfortunately, her kingdom was destroyed. Guinevere's memories from that time were very blurred. She only remembered that someone was chasing her nanny, who was carrying the girl in her arms. Having slightly pulled away from her pursuers, the nanny put the girl on the ground, saying that she would have to go further on her own. The woman pointed in the direction, saying that if she went that way, she would reach the White Castle. She ordered the girl to go there. Little Guinevere asked Una to go with her, but she smiled softly and noticed that she had forgotten something, so she could not go with her yet. The woman stood up and ran in the opposite direction. She promised Guinevere that she would catch up with her soon, but for now she had to go alone. This was the last time Guinevere saw her nanny alive. In an attempt to save the girl, the woman decided to become bait to confuse the military. Thanks to the nanny, Guinevere managed to get to Glastonbury Abbey, where she was joyfully received, citing the fact that it was God's will. The abbey turned out to be a very warm and calm place. What Guinevere remembered best was the promise she was never able to keep. This guy from her past, now just a fragment of her memories, came to her until she was 16, and then suddenly disappeared. Guinevere had many fond memories of the time she spent with that man, and she also remembered the priests who replaced her parents. The time spent in the Bright family, on the contrary, left her with a lot of pain. Guinevere got rid of the estate, the palace, even the title, and she did not regret anything. Even if Jiro tried to steal her title, thereby making her a commoner, he would absolutely find a way to manipulate the girl no matter what. The girl decided that she would need to look for a quiet place in the capital where she could stay, for the sake of what was coming in the future. The girl looked at the capital's landscapes, houses and streets, noting that it was quite cool here, however, as always. About 4 months passed, and Guinevere finally managed to purchase a 2-story house, located in a sunny location next to the market. And although the new house did not have a separate yard, there was a small vegetable garden located on the ground floor. Sitting down near the flower bed, Guinevere looked at the small sprout. She was told that this is a tree of luck, and it looks like it is now beginning to bloom. This plant was widely known as the tree of luck. In addition to purifying the air, it was said that this plant was blessed by fairies and would bloom only on lucky days. Guinevere guessed that those two must be going crazy right now. They should have already learned that the girl received a large sum of money after the sale of the estate, so now they must be looking everywhere for the girl. Their actions were too obvious. Madame McFadden is specifically looking for Guinevere because she had more money than she deserved. The girl decided that she was obliged to inform them first. Guinevere knew that if Jiro started looking for her, using his uncle's influence and connections, then sooner or later they would find her. If it involves money, then Uncle Jiro will be happy to cooperate. Guinevere couldn't afford to become a victim, so she had to wait for the right moment. After everything she had to go through in her past life, Guinevere promised herself that she would now make Jiro suffer. Having dressed warmly, Guinevere went out into the street, meeting Madame Harry there. The woman smiled joyfully at the girl, turning to that Miss Pugh, and asked if she was heading to the public stove in an hour. Guinevere replied that she was indeed heading there and invited the woman to go along. She happily agreed, but added that she would need to buy more flour on the way. These public stoves were established for the convenience of people like them. If you brought flour, you could bake bread, which was much cheaper than just buying ready-made bread. Guinevere was very grateful for this. The woman suggested we go quickly before it's too late. Arriving at their destination, Guinevere noted that there were more people here than in the bakeries. The whole point was that people did not have money for bread. Madame Harry noted that the man was absolutely a workaholic, and added more quietly that her Sophie was very embarrassed every time she saw this young man. Guinevere was kindly surprised at this. The woman burst out laughing, admitting that it was impossible to count how much Sophie cried for him. The women came closer when it was their turn, and the guy working there asked if they had come for bread and asked them to pass the flour. When Guinevere gave him the heavy bag, the guy asked them to wait a little. While picking up her finished bread, Madame Harry noticed that Miss Pugh was all alone here. She asked if the girl was lonely and added that she should introduce her to a worthy young man. Guinevere noted that it was not worth it, and everything was fine. But the woman insisted, saying that there are a lot of men here who should have gotten married, but they still don't have a partner. And the woman added that this is not because they lack something. Guinevere replied that this was not the case at all. She shared that her husband had just recently died. Madame Harry immediately covered her mouth, blaming herself for what she had said earlier. The woman admitted that her chatty mouth is a serious problem. She admitted that she didn't know anything, so she said something that didn't make sense. Madame Harry immediately apologized to Miss Pugh for her words. The woman noticed that Guinevere still looked so young, so she assumed that she was not yet married. But the girl no longer listened to her. Her attention was attracted by a boy who shouted that the war was over. Knights and ammunition began to appear on the square, and a crowd immediately gathered around them. It was an army. People were happy that they had finally returned and celebrated the victory parade. Looking at the soldiers, Guinevere noted that judging by the direction of their movement, they were going to the palace. Noticing a guy in the crowd, Madame Harry dropped the freshly baked bread from her hands without even paying any attention to it. She ran to her son, not believing that he had actually returned alive. She missed her Lancelot so much. Bursting with tears of happiness, the guy apologized for returning so late. He announced that they had won. We defeated the Aspilian scum. But Madame Harry was only happy with the fact that he managed to survive in the south. Looking at this heartbreaking picture, Guinevere remembered Lancelot, who asked to wait for him. It seemed to the girl that an eternity had passed since that moment. It was a very long time ago. There was a time when Guinevere thought that that boy would grow up and they would spend the rest of their lives together. This feeling of expectation of someone who seems to have evaporated. Guinevere decided that now it was just a meaningless memory. The soldiers, who had previously been marching in military formation, immediately stopped after the commander's command just when the girl was about to leave the square. Jumping off his horse, the commander walked with a firm step towards Guinevere, which surprised her. She had no idea who it could be or what he wanted from her. But before Guinevere even had time to think about asking a question, the man took off his helmet and the girl recognized a familiar face. It was Lancelot. Lancelot looked at the girl with eyes full of pain and regret. Noticing her confused look, he asked if she was going to run away again. Without saying a word, Guinevere took off, running away, hiding in the crowd of people, causing Lancelot to look after her in confusion. Guinevere stopped only after running into some alley, trying to put her thoughts in order. At least 8 years have passed since their last meeting, and Guinevere did not expect to meet a guy so suddenly. Guinevere wondered if her life would have been better if they had met earlier. Guinevere jerked in surprise when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Turning, she saw Lancelot. He finally found her. Unable to contain his feelings, Lancelot ran up to the girl, grabbing her hand. He wanted to talk to her so much, but not in this place. Guinevere asked if Lancelot should not lead the victory parade, and immediately covered her mouth with her hand, realizing that she was speaking to him as she had done before. Lancelot replied that the lieutenant would do it for him. He again tried to take the girl's hand, but she pulled it away. The guy felt hurt. He didn't understand why Guinevere kept trying to leave. Lancelot knew that too much time had passed, and therefore he understood why Guinevere treated him this way. Guinevere asked Sir Knight to let her go. Lancelot was surprised. He did not understand why the girl called him that. She replied that since she did not know his name, it would be better to address him that way. Lancelot was shocked. It was impossible that Guinevere did not know his name. Guinevere noted that a lot of time had passed since their last meeting. Lancelot agreed with her, especially considering how the girl was acting now. Screams were heard from the square. The soldiers called for their captain, wondering where he had gone. Lancelot felt the girl's hand in his, and the last thing he wanted to do now was leave. Squeezing the girl's hand in his, Lancelot was surprised at how cold she was. Without hesitation, the guy took off his scarlet cloak, throwing it lightly over the girl's shoulders. Guinevere was embarrassed. She wanted to give up the cloak, but Lancelot insisted, refusing to take it back. Squeezing the girl's hand more tightly, Lancelot pressed it to his cheek, closing his eyes blissfully. He believed that it was his fault that Guinevere felt offended. Lancelot admitted that for him the days without Guinevere were so long, and he constantly regretted how he treated her. But now he vowed that he would not lose her again. Having finally promised that he would definitely return to her, Lancelot finally released the girl, returning to his soldiers. When Lancelot, unable to control himself, turned to look at the alley in which they stood, it was already empty. Guinevere left. Guinevere returned home and was now sitting at the table, thinking about the situation that had happened. For Lancelot, several years passed before their reunion, but for her, a whole life passed. Guinevere knew that he was a nobleman, but she did not know what war he had fought in. All the girl was worried about was that a crybaby like him would participate in the war as a knight. With tears in her eyes, Guinevere remembered that in her past life, she thought that he had died, because she had not heard any news from him. Guinevere remembered the day when the abbot came to talk to her. He said that the monastery could not take care of her forever, and that the girl should understand this. He promised that he would negotiate with the Brights about her, and he added that this would be her best opportunity. Guinevere did not want to accept such a sudden agreement, but that year was difficult for the monastery. Finances were running out. Given the way things were going, Guinevere and the other children would have to go hungry. In addition, the girl could get a chance to repay the monastery for taking care of her, an orphan. In her past life, Guinevere heard about Lancelot only once, after she lost her husband. Even then, all she got was a couple of torn pages, although the fact that the envelope was cut seemed strange to Guinevere. She then thought that nothing could be done, considering that he sent it during the war. Guinevere simply could not think that someone could forge her letter. She thought for a second, and an unexpected guess shocked the girl. She didn't want to believe it. Guinevere was just mopping the floors when Jiro walked up and threw a letter at her feet. Then he also shared that he did not understand why she received such a letter. It seemed to him some kind of absurdity. Now Guinevere already knew that Denjiro was definitely hiding something from her. He lied to her in every possible way. Guinevere assumed that Jiro was afraid that she would leave the palace after the death of her husband and daughter, because if she did, he would lose a useful tool ready to do his dirty work. What if everything was different, and Jiro was simply afraid of losing the toy that he could mock? In the end, Guinevere decided that no matter what the real reason was, she didn't want to waste any more time blaming Jiro. Rising abruptly to her feet, Guinevere decided that she would rather make Jiro suffer twice as much as she suffered. From this thought, a satisfied smile appeared on the girl's face. There was a persistent knock on the door and a woman's voice looking for Miss Pugh. Guinevere noticed the opening of the door by Madame Harry. The girl asked the woman what had happened. Madame Harry shared that the festival is now in full swing, but she was not able to witness it. Guinevere did not understand what festival they were talking about. The woman continued that this time the army returned victorious. His Majesty is pleased to such an extent that he even opened the state treasury. The fact that the emperor opened the national treasury indicates that this is an event affecting the entire country and not an ordinary festival. Before Guinevere went back in time at this point, she was at Arthur and Sally's funeral, so she had not heard anything about the festival. The woman noticed that Miss Pugh did not look well and asked the girl if anything had happened in the hour. Smiling charmingly, Guinevere ignored the question. Instead, she suggested that the entire continent was celebrating now. Madame Harry confirmed this. She noted that the lords paid special attention to this festival, so she invited the girl to go there together. The woman said that she will have more fun with Guinevere, so she invites her if the girl doesn't mind. Guinevere noted that Madame Harry's son had just returned from the war, and it would be better for her to sit it out. The most important thing was to find out what was happening during that period. The girl asked if Madame Harry would like to spend more time with her son than with her. She noted that during such events it is better to be with family. Holding back tears, Madame Harry admitted that the fact was that her son sat in the room and did not want to leave. He was startled by sudden fireworks and suddenly began to shake. Because of this, the woman was upset and decided to invite Miss Pugh to the festival. Guinevere shared that she read about it in a book. It said that people who went through war may have such complications. She advised the woman to be careful and noted that her son needed rest. Smiling tenderly, Guinevere asked Madame Harry to return home and look after her son. In the end, Madame Harry admitted that the girl was probably right. She decided that she should cook her son his favorite roast duck, and Guinevere admitted that it was a great idea. Guinevere promised the woman that we would definitely come back later if there was time. The girl thought that even if the war was won, it would be very difficult to forget the deaths. In the end, she decided to go to the festival to see what it was like. The city was full of bright flags and carts with goodies, around which a crowd of people began to gather. She was the one who caught Guinevere's attention. Turning to her, the seller suggested that the girl not just look, but rather try. Guinevere asked if it was possible, and the seller immediately agreed. He also noted that if you add seasonings, it will taste even better. But Guinevere refused the spices. After chewing a small piece, Guinevere began to cough, noting that it tasted like hell. The merchant noticed that there was a huge misfortune, because she accidentally handed the girl a sharp piece. The woman carefully asked if everything was okay with the girl. Guinevere replied that she had never tried anything so spicy before, and her mouth still burned. However, surprisingly, it turned out to be delicious. Having washed it all down with water, Guinevere noted that all her worries suddenly disappeared. Having placed a couple of coins on the counter, the girl noted that thanks to the merchant, she experienced new sensations. It was spicy but tasty. Noticing the money, the woman replied that she could just go. Walking further, Guinevere noticed the presenter on stage, who was loudly announcing that the performance would soon begin. This was supposed to be the biography of the hero thanks to whom this war was won. Guinevere assumed that the very hero in question was Lancelot. This was indicated by the soldiers who called him Captain, his wise look. Guinevere might not have known anything about him in her previous life, but she wondered if she would now. Guinevere was just standing in line when a young guy suddenly got in front of her. A woman standing behind Guinevere began to swear at the guy for suddenly appearing and cutting into the queue. She saw everything. With a conspiratorial wink at the girl, the guy said that he was working here. But Guinevere firmly answered that he did not, and advised him to stand at the end of the line. Workers standing nearby turned to the guy and asked him to leave, since he was not standing in line. They also asked the girls to leave because they were making noise. Guinevere didn't understand what the hell he was talking about. The woman behind her was indignant. For what reason should she leave? The man explained that those who made noise were not allowed entry. This was their company policy. The woman was surprised, admitting that this made no sense, but Guinevere stood up for her. She asked if the man really didn't see what happened. And she added that if this is the theater's policy, then only Guinevere herself should leave, and this woman is not with her. One worker whispered something in the ear of another, and he, sighing heavily, clearly reluctantly agreed. Turning to the guy who was still standing there, he ordered him to leave immediately. The woman thanked Guinevere for her help, and she, answering that she was welcome, walked away. Sitting alone on a bench, the girl was even glad that she did not get to watch the performance. Otherwise, she would have regretted it. Guinevere decided that at the moment it doesn't matter to her what happened in the past. She lives in the present, and first she should visit Madame Harry. Standing near the door of their house, Guinevere was surprised at how quiet it was and how the lights were off. The girl thought that perhaps they had gone somewhere. After knocking on the door again and receiving no answer, Guinevere decided to come tomorrow. In the end, she could not stand under the house when the owner was not there. Guinevere was just approaching her house when she saw someone that made her freeze in place in surprise. Lancelot stood in front of the door of her house. He seemed hesitant to knock. Finally, the guy turned his head and noticed the girl. Lancelot immediately ran to her, grabbing her hand again. He said that he came because he promised her that they would meet again. Lancelot gently stroked the girl's face. He said that he had come to see Guinevere, but it was already late, so it was time for him to leave. Lancelot hoped that they would have plenty of time to talk. The guy admitted that he was having a hard time, so bowing to the girl, he promised that if he caused her any inconvenience, he would leave immediately. Affectionately kissing her hand, Lancelot admitted that he had tried so many times to become a hero for Guinevere. He asked if the girl thought he was weird. Kneeling in front of the girl, Lancelot admitted that every time he thought about her, he was overwhelmed with anger and resentment, but now these feelings had disappeared, and he just wanted to be with Guinevere. He had been waiting for their meeting for so long. Guinevere thought about it only for the guy. They had never met. She wondered if this had been a dark time for him. Only a few years have passed since Lancelot lost contact with Guinevere. In any case, we didn't have to wait long, but a lot of time has passed for the girl. It lasted like a night, after which the dawn did not come. Guinevere pulled her hand away, asking Lancelot to let her go. She admitted that she was uncomfortable. Lancelot asked the girl if she was trying to run away from him again, but Guinevere replied that she had never done that. Guinevere admitted that he was simply tired of waiting so long. Lancelot tried to say that he did too, but the girl interrupted him, noting that she did not want to blame anyone. All this was a consequence of Guinevere's own choice. She noted that Lancelot seemed to want to talk to her and suggested finding a more suitable place for this. They entered a small establishment that was completely empty of people. The employee behind the counter recognized Miss Pugh immediately. The girl noted that today Miss Pugh came with a wonderful man and asked who he was, but Guinevere replied that he was just an acquaintance. The girl asked the couple to sit at the table and wait just a minute while she prepared everything. Having placed cups of tea on the table, the girl also offered the couple scones, English shortbread muffins. They are usually eaten with whipped cream and jam. Lancelot noted that, contrary to all his assumptions, the girl seemed to be doing well. Guinevere asked if she had any reason not to move on. Smiling softly, Lancelot agreed with the girl. Guinevere asked what he wanted to talk to her about. She assumed that it was not childhood memories that brought the guy to her. Taking an envelope from his pocket, Lancelot said that when he arrived on the battlefield, he received a letter. Taking it in her hands, the girl quickly ran through the lines. This was said so that Lancelot would stop sending her letters, since she was marrying the Duke of Bright. Guinevere was sure that she had never written this letter, but she noted that the handwriting was very similar to Jiro's, and this letter was written a year after she married Arthur. Allies, enemies, no one can hide. In war, all people die, but Lancelot's greatest fear was not death. Guinevere barely listened to him. All she could think about now was how long ago they started deceiving her. Rising sharply, Guinevere noted that she knew why Lancelot came to her, but unfortunately, now she could not give the guy the answer he was counting on. Guinevere believed that their relationship ended a long time ago, so she wanted it to remain fond memories for them. The girl also added that she did not write this letter. Guinevere turned around, intending to leave, but Lancelot caught up with her. The guy asked if he could tell him the rest tomorrow. Guinevere agreed. Stretching sleepily, Guinevere was surprised that it was already morning. She had absolutely no memory of how she got home. Approaching the window, the girl could not understand what this strange sound was now. A man unfamiliar to her stood near the door of her house. He greeted Miss Guinevere Lepew courteously and introduced himself as Ridmond. He was a servant sent by the Armork family. Going out to the man on the street, Guinevere asked him if Sir Armork had sent him here. The servant replied that this was indeed so. He added that the master gave him an order to treat the girl with all respect. The servant told the lady that they would arrive soon. Guinevere thought that there was nothing wrong with being close to a person who was her hero in a past life. Guinevere decided that even if this turned into shackles, even if her wings were broken off again, she would still remain strong. Approaching the entrance, Guinevere met a woman there who immediately bowed to her mistress. She introduced herself as Evgenia and said that she was ordered to accompany the girl. Having led Guinevere along a long corridor and stopping at the entrance to the room, Evgenia announced that the gentleman was here. She'll wait outside the door. The woman also added that the owner ordered not to let anyone else in. Knocking on the door, Eugenia announced that Miss Pugh had arrived. A man's voice came from the room asking the girl to enter. Lancelot was sitting on the sofa. He didn't look as formal now as he did the last time they met. The guy immediately apologized to Guinevere for calling her so early. Lancelot admitted that he wanted to meet Guinevere as soon as possible. He also noted that he had a serious conversation with her. Lancelot led Guinevere to the sofa and invited her to sit down. The guy asked to listen carefully to everything he said, so that there would be no misunderstandings later. Lancelot admitted that in his family he is the last bearer of the Armork surname. There is no one else left. The butler was in charge of the family's affairs while the guy was at war, but now it's his time to take control into his own hands. Sitting down next to Guinevere and placing his palm on her hands, Lancelot admitted that he was telling her all this because he hoped for her help. The guy asked Guinevere to become the head of the family. Guinevere was surprised at this proposal. Lancelot said that the maid manages the house and other affairs, but the guy could not transfer such an important position to someone other than the girl. Taking her hands back, Guinevere asked Lancelot if this proposal seemed too strange to him, given their situation. Guinevere admitted to herself that before she came here, she had intended to use Lancelot, but now she did not want to do it at all. The girl did not understand what was happening to her. Guinevere thought that all her feelings for Lancelot should have remained in the past. Unexpectedly, Lancelot admitted that he used to often work with the younger brother of the Duke of Bright. The guy assured that he could help Guinevere, and she, if she wanted, could use him. Guinevere was extremely surprised by what was said. She didn't understand how Lancelot knew about Giro, or how much he knew. The girl believed that both in the past and in this life, Giro should not have had contact with Lancelot. Breaking the prolonged silence, Lancelot noted that it seemed like it was time for lunch and invited Guinevere to join him. But before Lancelot even had time to finish his sentence, Guinevere abruptly rose to her feet, answering that she would definitely consider the guy's proposal, but now she was not ready to give a definite answer. Guinevere added that she would try to answer as soon as possible. Sighing heavily, Lancelot said that he understood her. Guinevere was already at the door when Lancelot told her that tomorrow afternoon he would send someone to her again. Without answering, the girl left the room. Lancelot remained sitting in silence and splendid isolation, staring blankly at the wall. He was interrupted by a knock on the door, and the maid announced that it was Emily who had come. The maid began to put food on the table, but Lancelot interrupted her, saying that the guest had already left, and this food would be a lot for him alone, so she could divide this food among all the workers. Eugenia, who saw off the guest, said that she had prepared a carriage for Guinevere, which was waiting for her outside. The girl thanked her, but the maid replied that she was only doing her job. Moreover, for such a precious guest, everything should be of the highest standard. Already getting ready to go to bed, Lancelot asked the maid if his mother would go to the monastery tomorrow. She replied that yes, if it is sunny. Then the boy said that if she went, he wanted to keep her company.